badass woman of Herstory. Alice Guy Blache? Blache? I don't know how to pronounce her name. Blache? Um, Alice Ida Antoinette Guy Blache was a French pioneer filmmaker. And she was one of the first filmmakers to make a narrative fiction film. We all love narrative fiction films. Those are the best films. As well as the first woman to direct a film. From 1896 to 1906, she was probably the only female filmmaker in the world. She experimented with Gaumant's chronophone sync sound system and with color tinting, interracial casting, and special effects. Damn, sounds like a gangster. And I like making podcasts. I think one day I want to make a movie or a fucking music video or something, you know what I mean? I want to do something with the camera. She was artistic director and co-founder of the Solace Studios in Flushing, New York. In 1912, Solace Studios invested $100,000 for a new studio in Fort Lee, New Jersey, the center of American filmmaking prior to the establishment of Hollywood. What? So before Hollywood was in Jersey. Interesting. That year she made the film A Fool and His Money, probably the first to have an all African American cast. The film is now preserved at the National Center for Film and Video Preservation at the American Film Institute for Historical and Aesthetic Significance. Wow. In 1865, Alice's father, Emile Guy, an owner of a bookstore and publishing company in Santiago, Chile, and Valparaiso, Chile, married Marie Clotilde Franceline Albert. The couple returned to Santiago after the wedding in Paris. In early 1873, Marie and Emily lived in Santiago with Alice's 4 siblings. There was a devastating smallpox epidemic, smallpox in Chile in 1872 and 1873. Emily and Marie Guy brought all 4 of their children back to Paris, where Alice was born. In her autobiography, Alice refers to this as her mother's attempt to make sure her 5th child should be truly French. Her father returned to Chile soon after her birth, and her mother followed a few months later. Alice was entrusted to her grandmother in Carouge, Switzerland. Damn, she traveled. At the age of 3 or 4, Alice's mother returned from Chile and took Alice back to South America. At the age of 6, Alice was taken back to France by her father to attend school at Verrières, known as the Faithful Companions of Jesus, on the French side of the Swiss border in Verrières, France. Alice and her sister Louise were moved to a convent in Ferney a few years later and then brought back to Paris. Alice's father died on January 5th, 1891 of unknown causes. Following his death, Alice's mother got a job with Mutualité Maternelle, which was founded on May 20th, 1891. Alice's mother was unable to keep that job, and therefore Alice trained as a typist and stenographer, which was a new field at the time, to support herself and her mother. She landed her first stenography typist job at a varnish factory in March 1894. She began working at the Comptoir Général de la Photographie, owned by Felix Max Richard. Léon Gaumont later took over and headed the company. Boring part of the story. Her career, she was hired by Felix Max Richard to work for a camera manufacturing and photography supply company as a secretary. That's how she got into the industry. The company changed hands, president of the company, manager, the Eiffel, some boring shit. Although she initially began working for Léon Gaumont as a secretary, she began to become familiar with myriad clients, relevant marketing strategies, and the company's stock of cameras. She also met a handful of pioneering film engineers such as Georges Demeny and Auguste and Louis Lumiere. Guy Blache and Gaumont attended the surprise Lumiere event on March 22nd, 1895. It was the first demonstration of film projection, an obstacle that Gaumont, the Lumières, and Edison were all racing to solve. They screened one of their early films, working leaving the Lumiere factory, which consisted of a simple scene of workmen leaving the Lumiere plant in Lyon. Bored with the idea of captured film only being used for the scientific and a promotional purpose of selling cameras in the form of demonstration films, she was confident that she could incorporate fictional storytelling elements into the film. She asked Gaumont for permission to make her own film, and he granted it. Guy Blache made her first film in 1896. Its original title may have been La Fée aux Choux, or The Fairy of the Cabbages, or The Birth of Children, or it may have had no title at all at first. The scene Alice described as her debut effort does not match either the 1900 version of La Fée aux Choux or the 1902 version retitled Sage Femme de Première Classe. I'm sure I'm butchering these French words. Indicate there was a third film that came first. The 1896 film seemed to be lost. However, multiple points of confirmation indicate there were three different La Fée aux 30th of July 1896 newspaper describes a chaste fiction of children born under the cabbages in a wonderfully framed chromo landscape, and provides other details that confirm Alice's description of her first film. Before very long, Alice reported in 1912 every moving picture house in the country was turning out stories instead of spectacles and plots instead of panoramas. From 1896 to 1906, Guy Blache was Gaumont's head of production and generally considered to be the first filmmaker to systematically develop narrative filmmaking. Interesting. She was probably the only female director from 1896 to 1906. That's a decade. Her earlier films share many characteristics and themes with her contemporary competitors. She explored dance and travel films, often combining the two. In 1906, she made The Life of Christ, a big budget production for the time, which included 300 extras. She used the illustrated James Tissot New Testaments as reference material for the film, which featured 25 episodes and was her largest production at Gaumont to date. She employed one of the very first special effects, including using double exposure, masking techniques, and running a film backwards. During her tenure at Gaumont, Guy Blache hired and trained Louis Favolade and Etienne Arnaud as writers and directors, and hired set designer Henri Menessier and art director Ben Carré. In 1907, Alice Guy married Herbert Blache, who was soon appointed the production manager for Gaumont's operations in the United States. After working with her husband for Gaumont in the U.S., the two struck out on their own in 1910, partnering with that's 112 years ago. Partnering with George A. Maggi on the formation of the Solace Company, the largest pre-Hollywood studio in America. You hear that, Leo? With production facilities for the new company in New York, her husband served as production manager as well as cinematographer, and she worked as the artistic director and directed many of its releases. Within 2 years, they'd become so successful that they invested more than $100,000. That's then $100,000 then is like millions of dollars today, into new and technologically advanced production facilities in New Jersey. Many early studios were based in Fort Lee, New Jersey, at the beginning of the 20th century. Don't walk on the laptop. It was mentioned in publications that the area that Guy Blache placed a large sign in her studio that said, "Be natural." Bam. That's the whole thing. In 1913, Guy Blache directed The Thief, the first script sold by future Wonder Woman creator William Moulton Marston. Don't walk on the laptop, sir. Guy Blache and her husband divorced several years later, and with the rise of a more hospitable and cost-effective climate in Hollywood, their partnership in film also ended. In the late 1940s, Guy Blache wrote an autobiography. It was published in French in 1976 and was translated to English a decade later with the help of her daughter, Simone. Simone is a very popular French name because we did a Simone Seguin. She was a fighter. That's a throwback episode of Badass Women in Herstory. Let's see, she was tremendously concerned with her unexplained absence from the historical record of the film industry. Wow. She was in constant communication with colleagues and film historians, correcting previously made and supposedly factual statements about her life. She crafted a lengthy list of her films as she remembered them with the hope of being able to assume creative ownership and get legitimate credit for them. She was the subject of a National Film Board of Canada documentary, The Lost Garden, The Life and Cinema of Alice, Guy Blache, by director Marquise Lepage, which received Quebec's award in Best Documentary in 2002. She got some awards. They're finally giving her some credit. She was included in the New York Times Overlooked No More in 2019. She was an early influence on both Alfred Hitchcock and Sergei Eisenstein. Hitchcock remarked, "I'd be over the moon with the Frenchman Georges Méliès. I was thrilled by the movies of D.W. Griffith and the early French director Alice Guy." Wow. She directed her last film in 1919. In 1921, she was forced to auction her film studio and other positions in bankruptcy. Alice and Herbert were officially divorced in 22, and she returned to France in 22 and never made another film. Man, so she was broke. She died in a nursing home at the age of 94. She returned to the United States to live in Wayne, New Jersey with her older child, her daughter, Simone. Man, I'm sorry I'm out of frame because this cat's making me... Wow. There's a lot of movies too, it's a long list. So I got that from Wikipedia. Her name I got from a page called notgoodatnormal.com, and there's a section called Badass Women in History.